sides. Yep.
and you are here now for the opening session of this forum. Before we start with actually talking a bit about what this forum is and what's going to happen these days, I have two technical announcements. The first announcement is about interpretation. I think you saw when you entered, probably you saw at the door, the interpretation tools, the headsets. This forum is in English and French, so if you don't speak one of those two, please take a headset, because then you can follow all conversations throughout these 3 days. So grab your headset if you didn't do it already, okay? And this means that we will have, throughout these 3 days, you will be hearing both English and French, and then you can just switch your headset on if you need to, okay? Good. The second thing is about live streaming. Maybe the ones of you who were here yesterday, you might have seen on the screen in the corridor a sign that said something about live stream. This is because this opening session from 9:30 to 10:30 is live streamed online on YouTube, and so is the session after the break. So until the lunch, we will have a live stream that shows the stage, and maybe me as well right now. So there are some people who are following us online. This live stream will not be showing you, so there will be no cameras on the audience, but it will only be people who are speaking up front, okay? If you, especially later, would like to contribute, for example, by asking a question, you can do so from the audience, but the camera will not be on you, it will still be on the stage. So just keep that in mind. And if you want your friends to see what is happening in this first hours until lunch, you can also share the live stream link. So this was shared earlier, you saw it on the screen, and we will show it again later, okay? So it's possible for your friends to join in a little bit and see what you're doing here, right? Because our friends at home never know actually what we do when we come to this kind of event. So now it's a good time to show, okay? Very good. It's good to see all of you. My name is Ida. I'm part of the steering group that is organizing this forum. So there are a lot of people around the room who have been part of putting this together for the last year or so. A lot of work went into making this happen. So it's really good to see all of you here live in person. Okay? And now, as the first step, I would actually like to hand over the floor to Matthias Gruden, who is the Director for Democracy in the Council of Europe. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ida. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Council of Europe Youth Center in Budapest, the wildest place in town, where all sorts of cool and important things are unleashed on a regular basis. Thank you, Ida. Again, thank you for the introduction, but thank you first and foremost what you and your colleagues have been doing over the last year. It's a big thing to put together such a big event. And I would particularly like to thank Ida for her effort in coordinating this effort. Ida is also, this is the last event, at least for the time being, that Ida will be doing as a part of the Council of Europe team. So let's not make this goodbye. But thank you so far. I'd also like to thank all our partners in this regular and very important event of the forum. We are very pleased to be with you. We believe that this event has merit, produces results, and I think it would be an understatement to say that in the times we live in, we really need results on human rights education, on human rights in general. Now, in my brief intervention, I will zoom out a little bit and speak about democracy as well. First of all, because I'm the Director for Democracy, I'm also almost contractually obliged to mention it every time I'm speaking in public. But more importantly, because also I think we have to put this event and the importance of human rights education into a context. It's like, you know, you cannot organize education on safe navigation on the third deck of an ocean liner without having somebody on the bridge looking out for the icebergs. And I think that really we all agree that icebergs are many and big and scary. And thirdly, because the democracy is inseparable from human rights. We're not talking about two things. I think it's very clear that you cannot have a democracy, at least not the democracy that the Council of Europe was set up to defend and sustain, without an effective system on the protection of human rights. And you cannot have that effective system for the protection of human rights without having a proper human rights education in all its different forms. And equally, you cannot expect to have an effective system for the protection of human rights outside democracy. And thirdly, because of also my responsibilities for the new Democratic Pact for Europe, a major initiative that Council of Europe has started this year as a follow-up to the Summit of Heads of State and Government in order to really organize an effective response to what has been described as the democratic backsliding. And this event is an important contribution to it. Now, when we talk about democracy and even human rights, have you noticed how everybody, including me now, is talking in very dramatic terms about how democracy is in crisis, how human rights are under pressure? Everybody talks about it. But when you think about it, it's only a few years back, nobody was talking about it. There was no doubt that democracy and human rights within it is a sort of natural, inevitable, irreversible path that we shall all embark upon, those who haven't yet, the others will. And then suddenly, bam, and we went, after a very long period of denial, straight into the acceptance. And you know, in those stages of grief, we missed out a couple of steps in between. And I think also, the most importantly and most regrettably, we're almost acting as if we are already grieving for democracy. And I think that's dangerous. And I think the reason, one of the reasons why we had this has happened is that belief in the almost automatic, natural, logical, inevitable democratic future is that we had some misnotions about it. We always think about democracy as something's been there for a very, very long time, since the, you know, ancient Greece, and it is true. It has been there for about 200 years, which is actually the longest period the democracy, a democratic system, has actually been in existence until the Antipater of Macedonia put an end to the civilizational erosion that the Athenian democracy was unleashing upon the ancient world and its citizens with its Athenian democracy. But there's been a very, very long period of darkness after that, until what, late 19th century, when the first form sort of a democracy started to emerge. And then again, after the First World War, the really eruption of constitutional republics, 15, 16, when the empires have fallen apart. And it was then, more than 100 years ago, everybody was convinced, like we were a couple of years back, that that is irreversible, natural path for Europe and for other countries. A couple of years later, they were all gone. And we know what happened. And then we started again after the Second World War and after 1889, again with this belief that democracy is something that just happens regardless what we do or don't do with it, regardless whether we protect it, regardless whether we invest it. And that's, of course, a big mistake that is now showing its consequences. When you put together all the years of modern existence of democracy, it doesn't even come to 100 years. There are turtles in Madagascar that have a longer lifespan. So I think, clearly, I think everybody now agrees something has to be done about it. We see what the European Union is doing with its democracy shield in the Council of Europe. We have started our process towards the new democratic pact for Europe. And I think it's responding to three important points. The first one is going against that feeling that we have already lost that battle. I think that's very dangerous, that we have to simply, there's nothing to do. You know, that we lost our agency, we cannot, things have gone too far, the opponents of democracy are too strong, so let's just sort of give up and hope for the best. So the new democratic pact in Europe that was launched this year, first of all, is a political message. It says, no, it's not too late. It's a political message that is there to bring together all those who still believe in that form of democracy, and it provides us with the self-confidence and resolve that it's necessary to be successful, to stand up against those threats and challenges and those who are trying to undermine it. It has to start, of course, with acknowledging the magnitude of the problem. Denial has to be over. We have to take things seriously. But then at the same time, also say to ourselves and say to the world, we are able to defend this democracy because it's too important, because alternatives are too frightening. Secondly, what a pact is also going to look at is, what do we talk about when we say democracy? Because democracy is one of those very, very popular, very broad notions that can be interpreted by many people in many different contexts, in many different ways. And there is a specific model of democracy that the Council of Europe was set up to defend. It used to be called liberal democracy. Apparently that's no longer popular. But basically, it is a democracy which is not only based on regular elections, which they have to be, hopefully free and fair, but also has an effective constitutional and legal system for the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms. And we see how that important, that link between human rights and democracy is very important. We see it also in the negative because the attack on that model of democracy starts with an attack on human rights and protection of certain groups, certain individuals, and through that, an attempt to unravel the entire system for everybody. What do we mean when we say democracy? This is why one of the outcomes already of the process of the pact is the parameters on the Reykjavik principles for democracy. They have been adopted by the Steering Committee on Democracy just a week ago, which is basically a detailed, a normative guidance, what it means to be a democracy in today's world. It's based on Reykjavik principles, a very general, 11 principles, I think, but they have worked now for a year and a half producing those parameters and sub-parameters that are actually a very, very detailed description what a government should do and what it shouldn't do in order to be considered a functioning democracy. And the third one, I think it's very important, we have to make that distinction between democracy and the administration of democracy. Because when you're talking, people don't like democracy anymore, and they're frustrated and angry, they're actually not angry with democracy. They're not rejecting democratic values. They're frustrated by the way democracy has been administered. They're frustrated between that gap between what politicians say and what politicians do. Now that's important, but at the end of the day, if you don't do anything about it, it doesn't matter, because it's going to end up with people rejecting democratic values and embracing alternative ideologies and narratives. But it also shows us where is the path forward, to look at the way democracy is administered, to find ways to restore problems, to restore confidence, to improve governance, and to find new and creative and innovative ways to sustain democracy, to enforce democratic values, to make sure people enjoy those values and the rights it provides them in that very changed and rapidly changing environment we live in today. So this is what the NDP is doing on all those three points, as already said. It's organized in 3 pillars. What we are doing now, it's actually, I call it a conversation. It's bringing up together all different contributions around 3 pillars. The first one is learning and participating in democracy. The second one is protecting democracy. And the third one is innovating for democracy. And this forum is contributing at least to the 2, if not all 3 of them, in a very important way. I think I've already exceeded my time, and I'll come to an end. Just a couple of more things I wanted to say is the role of young people in all this. The fact that the Council of Europe has actually ultimately decided to step up its action is to a large extent thanks to the action of young people. It was the young people in the Council of Europe. They were the first that started to put the question forward, say something needs to be done. When the rest of the political decision-making across the Council of Europe area and more broadly were still in that denial mode. They've done that in many different, they've done that with the Democracy Here, Democracy Now campaign, which to a large extent contributed to the summit and its results. It resulted in the youth perspective adopted by the ministers of the Council of Europe, member states responsible for youth, in October in Malta. In most of the delegations had youth representatives in their ministerial delegation, already applying the youth perspective in action. And I also think that when it comes to human rights and education for human rights, that important role of young people is going to be essential for our success. So our priority now really is to apply the youth perspective. It may sound boring, but I think is a game-changing, revolutionary concept to bring young people into all areas of our public policy making, not just because we want to be nice to young people so you'd stop complaining all the time, but really because it is an investment in our capacity to find effective solutions to the problems we're facing, and we will be unable, a cognition that will be unable to find those solutions without bringing in to that specific experience, perspective, creativity, energy, disruptiveness, impatience that young people bring to that. And I think that if we're going to do it, and if you're going to do this now, today, on that very important subject of the education for human rights, we're going to make already a big step forward. I like the fact that this forum is not going to be just taking stock, it's going to be looking forward, and that's exactly what we need. So in short, I think if we want democracy to survive and grow old, older than turtles to start with, we need young people. I'd start with, I don't know, there are sharks in Greenland that live 500 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthias. And as you mentioned, this event would not be possible without the partnerships that we have and also the global partnerships. And that's why I would like to invite to the stage my wonderful colleague from the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Elena Ippoliti, who will read out the message from her regional director, Francesco Motta.
Thank you and good morning to all. My colleague is sorry not to be here with you, but I'm entrusted with the task of bringing to you his words. A warm welcome to all of you, participants and organizers of this forum. Let me extend my office thanks to the Council of Europe for co-organizing it with us and for our close collaboration in the area of human rights education and beyond. This year, the annual training program for young human rights educators that we deliver together has been replaced by this important gathering, which will help us take stock of where we are at this moment in history and where we are going as a human rights education community. I would also like to acknowledge our global civil society partners, which have joined us to support and bring participants from across the world. Amnesty International, the Global Campus of Human Rights, the Institute for the Study of Human Rights of Columbia University, the Kandersteg International Scout Center, and Togagaka International. Such partnership reflects a genuine shared commitment to advancing human rights education globally and ensuring broad, diverse youth participation in this forum. I don't need to elaborate on the challenges that our world is facing. We are going through tremendous troubles, from escalating conflict to climate chaos, growing divisions, inequality, and discrimination. Young people who make up 16% of the world population often bear the brunt of these challenges and wonder what the future holds. That is why human rights education matters so deeply. As the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights recently said, marking the launch of the 2025 Human Rights Day campaign, human rights are our compass in turbulent times, guiding and steadying us through uncertainty. Human rights education provides the tools, the right tools, not only to navigate this reality, but to shape it peacefully, powerfully, and with purpose. And we already see this happening. Across the world, young people are pushing us forward, demanding climate justice, inclusion, and accountability. Online and offline, they are raising their voices for human rights. I'm inspired by their young people's courage, clarity, and unshakable determination to build a better world for all of us. At the United Nations, states have increasingly expressed consensus on the importance of promoting and ensuring human rights education. In 2011, the adoption by the General Assembly of the UN Declaration on Human Rights Education and Training was part of a standard-setting process that began with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which expressly tasked every individual and institution to promote respect for human rights through teaching and education. Since then, provisions on human rights education and training have been incorporated into many international instruments. Member states have also adopted international frameworks for action, such as the United Nations Decade for Human Rights Education from 1995 to 2004, and the ongoing World Programme for Human Rights Education, which started in 2005, is open-ended and organized in consecutive 5-year phases, each focusing on specific audiences or issues. Human rights education is also included in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as a specific target of Goal 4 on quality education. Thus, internationally, we have been witnessing the launch of numerous initiatives to encourage human rights education. However, the value of all those instruments and commitments lies in the action that can inspire and support at the national and local levels, where human rights education needs to constantly take place. This forum invites us to think boldly. We are here to build on ongoing good work, but also explore new ways of doing human rights education, ways that reflect your lived realities, your digital landscapes, your climate and gender concerns, and the world that you are helping to shape. Your perspectives and reflections here will ripple outwards. They will feed, among others, national and global work in the context of the current 5th phase of the World Programme for Human Rights Education, dedicated to children and youth, with an emphasis on education in relation to human rights and digital technologies, to environment and climate change, and to gender equality. You will help shape better approaches, stronger partnerships, and more grounded practices that can move human rights education forward in communities and far beyond them. And we are also here to build bridges. When young people, educators, activists, and institutions meet across borders and backgrounds, something powerful happens. We see how our struggles connect, how our hopes overlap, and how much we can learn from one another. This forum is one of those rare spaces where that shared energy becomes visible. My office, the UN Human Rights Office, works to strengthen spaces where you can learn, connect, and lead. In line with the UN system-wide youth strategy, Youth 2030, which entrusts the whole UN system with supporting young people's engagement, participation, and leadership. Globally and nationally, through our field presences, we promote civic engagement and create opportunities for young people's voices to be heard and amplified. Some of the young educators in this forum are our national counterparts. We collaborate closely with youth-led and youth-focused movements and education organizations as those represented in this forum. And in coordinating the World Programme for Human Rights Education, we also remind states of their related commitments. Next year, in September, we will convene at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva a high-level panel discussion to mark the 15th anniversary of the UN Declaration on Human Rights Education and Training. And we plan to bring there your voice and perspectives as discussed here. We hope this forum will contribute to the emergence of a strong and more visible global human rights education movement, which we need today more than ever. Real progress can happen when relevant actors across the world work together. What matters most is the collective energy that we can all bring, different perspectives, shared learning, and partnerships that cross borders, sectors, and generations. This is how we can build a resilient, connected community of human rights educators, one that can meet the challenges of today and those still to come. I wish you all a very fruitful work.
Thank you, Elena. Now I would like to give the floor to Nina Grmusha, who is the chair of the Joint Council of Youth in the Council of Europe.
Does this work? It does, right? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Nina. Pronouns are she, her, and I'm the chairperson of the Advisory Council on Youth and Joint Council of Youth, the Council of Europe. That is a lot of words, right? So what does that mean? It means that I have the right and the duty to sit in a very unique system of co-management of deciding priorities, programs, and what else, let me see, policies and funding for the youth sector in Council of Europe member states meeting here in this region. And I do not represent a government, and you would maybe wonder how is then a young person coming here co-deciding something based on consensus for a whole intergovernmental institution in the whole continent, because we also have, as I said, the Advisory Council on Youth, which brings together 30 young people, representatives of youth-led organized civil society that decide together. And it is my pleasure to here represent both, which means seeing how do we bring together everything. But let me start with first thanking everyone for being here, for thanking Council of Europe and the UN Office for Human Rights for organizing this event together with all the partners that we've mentioned as Amnesty International, the European Youth Forum, and everyone else who is here, and of course, this huge community of practice. Well, I was looking, when preparing for this speech, I was seeing that, okay, what should I say? What is the message that we want to bring? And I was looking at the message from the previous forum, coming from the young people there, from all the participants. And they said that human rights education must be illuminated by the lived experience of learners, of right holders, right? And that human rights education is a right in itself, and that it is a catalyst for all other human rights. So that stayed with me. And I was also told that we should be forward-looking and I should bring a message of hope. But looking at that message and then being here as a young person, sometimes it is difficult to have a lot of hope. This message was urgent then, and it is urgent today, where maybe the weight of the world feels even heavier. We can see a very, very changing world. We can see a lot of wars. We can see polarization, democratic backsliding even more, shrinking civic space, disinformation, not knowing how to navigate AI, and so on. And voices of those who are trying to convince us that human rights are negotiable, and of those who say that young people are apathic. But we know more than this. So as Advisory Council on Youth, as Joint Council, and I think probably everyone in this room can sign up, we know that the situation is a bit different, because young people are in the forefront of defending human rights and showing us where human rights should be. And we can see this in many movements, and maybe if I was only the chairperson of the Advisory Council, I would give you some examples, but I think examples, we know them all, of where we can see how young people are leading across the world, even if they're facing disproportionate attacks for the acts that they're doing. And maybe sometimes those that we call apathic are just young people who don't feel safe. And not because they don't care, but because systems that are meant to protect their dignity and human rights are weakening. But then we fight against that. And I think one example from seeing what's changed since then until now is also looking at, and when you look at the message from Turin, you can see this very shocked message of support to young people in Ukraine, where the war of terror against Ukraine had just started. And downstairs in the Nordic room, you can see an exhibition of Tales of the Brave, seeing how young people in Ukraine, amidst the war and against it, well, despite it, have been fighting and have been believing in human rights and have been educating others to do so. So I was just thinking, how do I bring a message of hope? And I had this one thought, and then please forgive me, because, okay, I was thinking about Harry Potter. We were recently talking about it. I know that the author of this series has been very canceled, and I signed up to that, but I remember this one scene. There is this scene called Battle for Hogwarts. It's one of the chapters in the last book. And you see a lot of older people who have given up, and they say, well, the evil forces have won. And you are fools for believing that you can do something about it. And you know, you have Voldemort, you have the Dementors, you have all of these scary, scary forces that don't believe in equality for all. But you have the young people, and they show up. And they show up and they use their magic. And the first ones who go in battle with them are their teachers, are their mentors, and they go and stand first defending education and this beautiful magical building that brings them all together. And when I think about human rights education, I also think about that. I think there is a lot of magic in it, because human rights education is really indispensable. It turns principles into practice, and it translates these abstract concepts into everyday realities. And it orients us when the world shifts and inspires us to live by these universal human rights with, for, and by young people. And this forum then brings together this community of practice that makes these rights more tangible, lived, and lasting. And we translate them to reality, and we transform the realities of those whose lives we touch. I know that sometimes, as I've mentioned, there are those voices who say that young people don't care, they don't know, or something. And sometimes we don't know what we don't know. That is a very basic thing. We don't know what we don't know. But we don't know it unless we have a space to discuss, a space to meet, a space to learn together, to be listened, to understand difference, and somebody who believes in them. And that someone is someone who works on human rights education. So, you know, maybe we don't live in a fictional world. We don't maybe battle against very, very dark magical forces, although I'm sure the real ones have their spells to try to be convincing. And we don't have, human rights are not magic. They're a foundation, and they have to be solid and strong. But there is a bit of magic in the work that we do, because maybe magic lies in education. It lies in learning and practicing empathy. It lies in connecting. It lies in creating these spaces where we feel heard, in spaces where we think about the needs of others, how they're different of ours, and how do we achieve them together. So maybe there is a bit of magic in the action that we take in that. But it's not only about this kind of magic, there's also other tools and standards, right? Because as we said, that human rights educators, they translate these rights into lived realities, and they help young people make sense of this confusing, evolving world around us and equip us to lead the way. And there are some very strong foundations. And I will just mention a few from Council of Europe, because I think it's important that it's said here that we have to, so these are tools that we have to use, right? As the Charter on Education for Democratic Citizenship and Human Rights Education, then the reference framework of competences for democratic culture, very importantly, the Compass Manual, and of course, its little sibling Compassito, But no, like all of these trainings that we do in Human Rights Education Youth Program and national trainings, and they are evolving and growing, and we use them and we recycle them and we upscale them and magic them up, right? So there is a bit of magic in that. So when I was thinking, where does my hope lie for human rights education and human rights, it is in this room. It is in the fact that we are here. So thank you very much for being here. I originally am an anthropologist, and I remember this one beautiful quote. It's not magic, but I think it encompasses the magic that I think about. It's Margaret Mead who said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. It is the only thing that ever has." So I was trying to see how can I finish with looking back at the title of this very important forum, Unleashing Human Rights. Well, I don't know, unleash your thoughts, your experiences, your doubts, challenges, talk about it, enjoy these days, and thank you for all the work you do.
Thank you, Nina, for these very inspiring words. They speak very much to my millennial heart. And now, finally, and very importantly, I would like to give the floor to Marie Stratters from Amnesty International. Floor is yours.
Technical geniuses? Like that? Okay. And this is much higher for Nina. Distinguished colleagues, dear friends, hello to all of you who want to make change and make this world a better place. I don't feel naive in saying this, because we really need to make this world a better place. I will be speaking from the Eastern European and Central Asian perspective in this broad Council of Europe space. And the first thing I want to say, in gratitude to you, Nina, for mentioning it, is thank you to the Ukrainians who are every day paying the ultimate human rights price so that we in Europe and beyond can live in a safer, more humane and better world. We're celebrating today both human rights conventions and many human rights education, magnificent, I have to say, programmatic achievements. But I have to be honest, and Nina and others, you have painted your words on a path of hope. It's tough to celebrate. We're in a human rights crisis. It's global. The very foundations of the anniversaries we have gathered here to celebrate are shaken, and universal human rights are under attack. What does it mean? The post-World War II promise of never again has been broken just 500 kilometers away in recent decades, and also with the continuing genocide of our sisters and brothers across the Mediterranean Sea. A missile and drone-driven war 1,000 kilometers from this city kills more of our sisters and brothers daily and blights the future of millions of children. Rare minerals are worth more than human lives. And a core European institution, the European Court of Human Rights, which holds the Council of Europe to its vowed commitment to human rights, is at the moment attacked by various countries in their pursuit of anti-migration politics and policies. I'll get to hopeful stuff in a moment. Council of Europe member Georgia has been plunged by its government into a deep human rights abyss, 180 degrees away from what the polls show to be an overwhelming preference for accession to the European Union. And just last week, we learned that law enforcement reportedly deliberately used water cannon infused with chemicals to injure peaceful protesters so that they couldn't protest again. In October, Latvia's parliament moved towards becoming the first EU country to withdraw from a major Council of Europe convention, the Istanbul Convention. What went wrong? Well, in the east of the Europe and Central Asian region, we certainly weren't fast enough or strong enough on human rights education and the universal human rights values and the human rights institutions attached to these. Values went wrong. Storytelling went wrong. Fear, violence, intolerance, and discrimination took over. Civil society has been decimated and stigmatized via foreign agent legislation and more. And traditional values are touted as the antidote to Western and imperialistic universal human rights values. We haven't done enough to localize human rights in local traditions, histories, and languages, almost all of which are universal human rights values based, embracing justice, freedom, and peace. To tell the story locally, to resist the stigmatizing outsider narrative. We absolutely must get human rights education in schools, as school is one of the main ways to localize human rights. Yes, we must of course work with youth, but with all other sectors as well, combining formal and informal human rights education as much as we can, everywhere. Basically, we need human rights education on steroids today to entrench, root, and retell the legacy of the post-World War II universal human rights achievements. So I've described the crisis, but as the old saying goes, there's always opportunity within a crisis. And here are the few of the examples I would like to bring. I mentioned Georgia. A Tbilisi-based colleague, I'll call her Natalia, has since the continued brutal crackdown on protests since 2024 fearlessly attended and documented protest and trials of protesters, taking notes on ill treatment and torture and gross abuse of fair trial rights. They have all the while delivered a baby. We hope that the infant will not suffer from their exposure to the hazardous chemicals in the water from the water cannons that I mentioned. And they also passed their lawyer's bar exam. Superwomen of the world, unite. I must note, women have been at the forefront of the protest, which have going on for a full year in Georgia. Ukraine. My colleagues in Kiev tell me, as they navigate drones and blackouts in the cold, that human rights is like breathing. That is necessary to a life of dignity. Almost all of my colleagues have right now, or have had, a close family member on the front line. Amnesty's own former human rights education specialist has been obliged to leave his human rights work and take up military duty. But our colleagues are, for example, defending foreign prisoners of war who have been coerced or trafficked into combat roles and who are without legal representation or medical support. Our exiled, I have to say, Russian colleagues work right alongside the Ukrainians, helping to deliver medical aid and facilitate correspondence with families for Ukrainian prisoners of war in Russia. Despite the missiles and the exile, they are all doing work bigger than themselves and telling the stories of others. And there's no better example of being bigger than themselves than the joint People First campaign, which is led by the Ukrainian, Belarusian, and Russian Nobel Prize laureates to release all those held captive by Russia's war on Ukraine. Belarus, some of you know her, I hope. Our esteemed human rights education colleague Nasta Loika has been unjustly sentenced to 7 years imprisonment, and yet she managed to finalize a manual on human rights education between her court hearings and prison confinement, bigger than herself. She continued to prize human rights education despite the hardship. In Azerbaijan, a colleague, I'll call this one Mehman, whose health has been broken by the time he spent in prison unjustly wrote to me 9 days ago, "Marie, I'm already almost left alone in our sector." He's referring to the stigmatization and criminalization of human rights defenders in Azerbaijan. "But it is my civic duty to continue to stand up for others and defend freedom." Another Azerbaijani colleague, this one I'll call Polat, in exile due to his freedom of expression activities, tells me, "Hope is not naive. It is optimism with a broken heart." My ambition is not only to work to highlight the repression of stigmatized communities, but also their resilience and their joy. The above examples are not Western, nor led from the outside. They are local. They are rooted in local values of justice, equality, and freedom, and they are action-oriented. They have an intrinsic understanding of what is right. In my view, these people are prime human rights educators. They are the change. They are being who they are, which is the ultimate promise of universal human rights. And they are restoring universal human rights values. As per another Amnesty International slogan, they are taking injustice personally. We need to support and encourage international solidarity for these change makers and tell their story 100 times over. It's time to double down. We must unleash human rights for all of us to be the Natalias, the Mehmans, the Nastas, and the Pulats, to strengthen people power against authoritarian practices. Beyond youth, and because we are in a human rights crisis, we must all be educators and storytellers towards value-based, action-oriented human rights education. So, and I'm also disruptive, by the way, and impatient beyond the youth, and I think we all need to be, and anybody of any age and background can act that way. So I want to say thank you ever so much, Council of Europe colleagues, in the first instance, and to everybody here. We're all doing much of the right thing. We just bloody well need to do a lot more of it.
Thank you to all of you. Now, before the break, I think it would be a good idea to turn a bit the focus to all of you in the room, because as it was said before, what matters is all of you and all of your work. So we would like to just do a very quick check-in exercise using this tool Mentimeter. So for this you will need your phones and you will need to scan the QR code. If it doesn't work for some reason, you can turn to the person next to you and you can do it together. So we can already start networking in this moment if we have to. So, and by the way, if you cannot reach this, you also have it behind you. So you have screens on both sides. If I'm somehow in the way, yeah, there are 2 screens, now we know. Okay, so we wait for more people to join, and then I will tell you what to do next, okay? So the task here is to get to know a little bit who is actually in the room, because these are the people we will be working with for the next 3 days, right? Okay. Good. Okay, so I think we can go to the first question. As you might have realized, we are a big group of people from all over the world. And your task is to try to indicate on this artsy picture where you traveled from. You can see the... Okay, thank you. I think we see more or less the picture, right? The diversity, and we also see that some people traveled really far and with for many hours. So that's something that you can also explore more, I think, in the coffee break. Good, thank you. I think we can go to the next question. So emotions, right? Some emotions were mentioned, but maybe there is more in us. So here you can express how you are. You can also skip if you don't want to have a stand on certain emojis. And then we will see the average for all of us. So are we tired? Are we angry? Are we fire? What are we? Okay, thank you. What I see here is a lot of smiling faces, which is, I think, a very good start. I also see fire. I think this is also a good thing. Not so much anger, which I think anger is a valid emotion when we speak about the world today. But I think what I see seems quite constructive. Let's see how this will change also in the next 3 days. Good. Yeah, there is a bit of tiredness also here. Good. Then one last question, just to check in a little bit who we are, actually. And here we might be many things. I think all of us are many things, and you can tick many things if you want. And we will just see a little bit the distribution here of roles, how we see ourselves. Many educators, I think that's really good to know in a human rights education forum, that there are educators in the room. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. I think what we can see here is that there is a bit of a diversity of roles, even though some of them are also maybe a bit similar. But I think we will have time also in these next days to explore a bit actually what all of us are doing, and there will be more time actually for you to meet each other and to learn, oh, what is someone researching, or what is this teaching that you do. Good, thank you so much. Before we go for the break, which I know you need because I know that some of you are tired and there is coffee waiting for you. Before that, we want to give a couple of announcements which will also help you for the next days. And the first thing is about the final thing, because we want to tell you something about the message that will come out of this event, so that you are also a bit more informed when you go into working groups and so on. And for this, I want to give the floor to Nadia, who is part of coordinating this thing, and she will tell you a bit more what this is and how it concerns you.
Thank you, Ida. Good morning. Can I hear a good morning from your side also? Okay, cool, because what I will tell you in the upcoming minutes is also about hearing you, so I wanted to hear you already. We will have a final message of this forum. And I'm here to tell you what it is actually about. So this final message, it will be a message of the participants within the forum, which will be like a 2-page document with a shared vision of us as participants and as contributors here in the forum. And it needs to be clear also so what it is, but also what it is not. So we need to understand that this final message is not a final report. So we will have a separated, distinct technical report, which will include all the detailed inputs, all the detailed conclusions that you will bring in the discussions. But this final message of the participants will be more into the meaning, into the common values that we are sharing as the community of practice. It will be more on the overarching priorities that are common across sectors, across countries, and across continents that we are coming from. And of course, it can be used and taken by each of us as a tool for advocacy, so for contributing to shaping policies and making sure that human rights education is advanced and that it reaches young people wherever they live, wherever they learn. And for this, there is a drafting group that was formed and which is leading and shaping the final text of the message. But this drafting group has the main aim of bringing all your inputs in this final message. And for this, we have set up several channels for hearing from you and for making sure that your inputs are also reflected in this final message. So some of these tools are, for example, the consultation wall, which is a wall placed outside this room, so in the main hallway here at the 4th floor, which contains some open-ended statements where the invitation is for you to contribute to those. So this is a way through which you can express yourselves on some statements that we are giving to you, but we will also have a space for you to come with some more statements on this consultation wall, and you can already start to contribute now in the coffee break, during the whole day, and also tomorrow. We will also have a listening corner, which will be happening tomorrow evening, and you will get a chance to interact directly with the members of the drafting group and have some short conversations and make sure that your input are heard by the drafting group. We will also be present in the workshops and in the working group so that we can directly hear on the different topics of the workshops. And we will also have in the last day on Thursday a Padlet to confirm with you that the final version of the message is something that you agree with and that it is indeed a common vision. And we would also like to include some quotes from you, some, let's say, catchphrases, so we will also be all ears for this. And we know, but we also want you to know that we cannot fit everything in a 2-page document, so we also need to be aware of this. So we will have to make sure that what is included there is the generally representation of what the community of practice believes, needs, and which are its priorities. And now I would invite the members of the drafting group to stand up for a shout-out, but also to identify them so that you can approach them during these 3 days. So Peter, Alan, Aizat, Irfan, Constanza, Ravand, and also Yael, which is supporting on behalf of the Secretariat. So these are the amazing people that you can approach for sure at any time and have discussions during the breaks, during the free times also. And yeah, thank you and looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Nadia and the group, and thank you also for mentioning the final report, because we also have a general rapporteur. Her name is Felisa, and I think she's somewhere here. Hello, there you are. And Felisa will also be around, so if you see her listening, you know why she's listening, because she's actually writing the final report. And on the last day, she will also tell you a bit more what her findings are until then. So that's so you don't get suspicious if you see her around your groups. A couple of words also about safety, and for this I would like to give the floor to Sophie.
Thank you, Ida. Yoreket, good morning, bonjour everyone. So I'm Sophie. I joined the team and the steering group that organized this forum just a few months ago, and I'm actually really pleased to see your participation and everyone today. So safety, safe space, that's the message. The Council of Europe has long been committed to promoting human rights, dignity, and equality in all its work. Our European youth centers, the one you're here in Budapest, but also the one in Strasbourg, are built on these same values to provide a space where everyone, in all their diversity, can participate fully, safely, and respectfully. While we strive to ensure that this forum offers a truly safe and supportive environment, we also recognize that experiences vary from one person to another. If at any point you feel uncomfortable, unsafe, or simply need assistance, some support is available for you. As you've already seen in the info pack you have received, in case of medical or security emergency, please dial 112 or the number of the reception desk here at the center, and you have the number on the screens. You can take a picture of that screen. Without judgment and with full respect for your dignity and rights, should you feel you need assistance, please call anytime the safe line. The number is the +33 number, and you have my name next to it. You can speak to us either in French or in English, whichever feels most comfortable for you. Please note those numbers. They are here for you. I thank you for your attention, and I wish you a great forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And one final slide for you. I don't know where to stand so you can see it. If you want to have us share your social media stuff, you can tag if you scan this QR code, I believe you get to the, I think, Instagram of COE Youth. And there will be posts shared throughout these 3 days. And they will also be sharing the post that you post where you tag this account. So if you want to be famous, this is one way of doing it. And you can also either use these hashtags that you see there, or you can follow them, and you can just see what other people are doing. So this is just a little social media announcement, and I think this will also be displayed somewhere else, so you can also, you don't have to do this now, you can have a look later. It's just for your information. And then the next step is to go for a coffee break. Just to tell you, for those of you who have not seen or did not find the consent form for photos, you need to try to find it today. I think at reception where you registered, there will be some papers that you can go and find. You can either sign and say that you consent to your photos being used. If you don't consent, and thank you, so you consent to photos and to having your name in the public list of participants. If you don't consent, you still need to go to the paper and write that on the paper. So we need the paper from everyone so that we know what you consent to and what you don't consent to. So apparently there was some confusion about finding this paper. That's okay. The paper is downstairs. So at some point today, it would be good if you feel like maybe I didn't sign or didn't do anything, you go and you do that. And then we will know for sure who should appear in pictures and who should not. So it's for everyone's safety and comfort, okay? So that you can add to your to-do list maybe for the break. And that's it. So I think now we will have coffee. It's very important to do as well. And we will give you 30 minutes. So if we could meet back in this room at 10 past, we will try to see if it works. The coffee is served in the corridor and everywhere in the corridor. So you don't need to go to the first machine and queue. If there is a queue, you can go a bit further and there will be another machine, okay? I think if we spread out, we will all have coffee faster and it's very important, okay? Enjoy your break.
Okay, I think.
Mariah will do the interview to you. And yeah, so it's all is set up. It's better today, I said, because I saw your mail about tomorrow, that you will be on a phone call with the hotel. So we do this today, then tomorrow you're...
Okay, I think I'm ready to start. Are you? Very good. So, welcome back. This is the first panel of the forum, titled The Long Arc of Human Rights Education. I'm going to be your moderator, or the moderator of this panel, and I'm saying your moderator because we have a desire, intention, and motivation, enthusiasm, and everything to make it a participatory panel where the discussions are co-shaped with the participants of the forum who are human rights educators coming from across the globe. My name is Sulhan. I am an education advisor working in the European Youth Center for the Council of Europe. And I am going to moderate this forum with a very rich panel. And shortly, I will introduce the panel members. Before that, I wanted to do a little bit of introduction of the introduction. Then I will do the introduction, and then we will open the space for questions and discussion. In the last forum for human rights education in 2022, a lot of things that were mentioned in the opening today were mentioned. And one of the critical reflection that I think somebody who was very passionate about human rights education brought was the metaphor of McDonald's and how sometimes human rights education is perceived or was perceived across the globe as like this, like imposed from the West, you are opening McDonald's, it's everywhere, and it's not mine, you know. And then I think, Mary, you spoke about localizing and like how it's important, even especially now, to like own it, you know. It's something that is for us. It's not something that other people are telling us we should do. And I think it's very important to keep in mind when we talk about the past, because this panel explores past of the human rights education with a very clear intention that we are not going to speak about the past with an intention of nostalgia and to say how brilliant moments they were in the past, but with an intention to learn something from this past, right? So this is the idea of the panel. And at the same time now, I mean, when some nights ago, or every night actually, to be honest with you, before I go to sleep, I think about changing profession, you know, because, you know, who needs human rights education anymore? Sometimes I tell myself, so maybe I go to human resources, or maybe I do this. I'm a social worker by training. Maybe I get licensed for social work, this kind of stuff. And then I wake up, I have my coffee, and I say, no, we should unleash humans in us. We should fight for human rights education. So let's see what is there. The long arc of human rights education is a borrowed metaphor of Martin Luther King's quote, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." This panel is about the past, but the past that informs both the present and the future. Sometimes this past helps explain the logic behind the human rights education, how it functions today. What were the needs of young people when human rights education, as it stands now, was being shaped? And are these needs any different now? If so, what has changed? The long arc metaphor refers to progress, because social and moral change doesn't happen quickly. It takes years, decades, or even generations. It also conveys a message of hope and direction. There are setbacks, especially right now, in a world where human rights challenges are significant, but Can the recent history of human rights education teach us about hope? Especially, you also mentioned in the opening, critical hope, right? It's not hopeless hope. This links to the collective responsibility. The bend doesn't happen automatically. People shape it through activism, education, advocacy, and courage. That's where the critical hope comes in. And finally, it reflects continuity. We are part of a long, ongoing story of human rights struggles that began before us and will continue after us. How will this continue for human rights education in the world? And these are some of the critical questions that we are going to tackle in this panel. With the panelists of very, very, very honorable people. Manfred Nowak, who is Secretary General of Global Campus of Human Rights. Yes. Anka Ruxandra Pandey, also known as Ruxa, Project Manager, Education, Training and Cooperation Division. Elena Ippoliti, Coordinator of our Human Rights Education Unit in the UN Human Rights. Natalia Kallio, and here is only her one title, she has several, Board Member, European Youth Forum. And Kate Moriarty, Head of Human Rights Education, Amnesty International. So we're going to start with some opening question with the panel, and then later on you will see we have an intention to make it participatory. So please feel also encouraged to contribute not only with questions, but also with your points of view. The arc of the moral universe and the arc of human rights education are closely related, we believe. Human rights are universal, and human rights education is itself a human right. So my question to you, dear panelists, is when we talk about the arc of human rights education, what does the arc represent to you, and how has the field evolved over time? And that's the disclaimer that we are not talking about generic stuff here. Each of our panelists will also focus on their scope of work within their respective practice and institutions. Okay? So, Manfred, I would like to invite you first to kick in the conversation.
Hi, everybody, and thanks. Thanks for. He's probably starting with me because I have the longest arc in my personal life. So I also had the honor and pleasure of being taught human rights by two of the pioneers of the first generation, Felix Emakora in Vienna and Louis Henking at Columbia University. That means also that I started teaching human rights already in the 1970s. But to going back, the universality, I mean, universal and also European human rights only started after and in reaction to World War II and the Holocaust, so after 1945. And human rights education was in principle very soon also related directly. If you look into the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, into the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So if you look into the right to education, it also says it should strengthen respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. So education at every level, and you said it before already, from the kindergarten to the university, should also be aimed at strengthening human rights. No? And then later, that was more, because the question was also, is there a human right to human rights education? And we started that really in the Vienna World Conference on Human Rights 1993, where I had the honor, it was more a burden, I would say, to coordinate more than 1,500 non-governmental organizations whom were coming from all over the world to Vienna, and it was not so easy to coordinate them, but they had a major impact. And one was, and that's the outcome in the Vienna Declaration, that there is a right to access of everybody to human rights education. And that started also the UN Decade for Human Rights Education, and that led to the to the Council of Europe Charter on Education for Global Citizenship. 2010, 2011 was the UN Declaration on Human Rights Education and Training, etc. So that clearly says that we should teach, on the one hand, knowledge, so teach knowledge about human rights, but also teach skills through human rights and for human rights attitudes. And that is, I think, a very important aspect. And I personally am deeply convinced, and again, you said it already, that I think it's such a long time that states have an obligation to make human rights and democracy education, but human rights education, and as you said before, democracy and human rights are inseparable, a mandatory subject of every education from kindergarten to universities. And we don't have that yet. I think we are quite well developed in masters, specialized usually legal or interdisciplinary masters in human rights education. But we lack bachelors. It's very, very few undergraduate studies at the universities, and much less mandatory subjects in high schools or primary schools, etc. And that is states violating their legal obligation to provide human rights education. I also, and I brought here the latest annual report of the Global Campus of Human Rights, Persistence of Frontline Human Rights Educators. We called it because not only human rights defenders, frontline human rights defenders are under threat, it's more and more also that human rights educators are under threat. The Global Campus is probably the largest network of universities providing postgraduate, master human rights education. We started in 1997, so at the beginning of the first decade on human rights education, it was an EU initiative together with the University of Padua, Antonio Papisca, and the idea was an inter-university, interdisciplinary, pan-European program. Ola, who is the director of this EMA program, European Master in Human Rights and Democratization, was started already at that time, when the idea was there is no human rights, there are no human rights professionals, because there's no education for that. So we needed well-educated people who could then have a career in human rights, in intergovernmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, being sent to the field. There were so many new post-conflict United Nations and also other field missions where you, for the first time, needed not only military, but also well-educated specialists in human rights and democratization. So that was the idea at that time, and we have thousands of graduates now of the whole global campus, because we have 8 master programs in most regions of the world. But the purpose changed very much. The people who came in the 1990s or early 2000s were people who were interested. Human rights is something very interesting. I want to become a human rights professional. Today, people are saying, I am a human rights defender already. And we need human rights education now because we are in a crisis. And we need it more than ever. And I want to have some kind of the theoretical background that helps me to do my advocacy work in the field, in whatever non-governmental or other organizations. So the profile of our students is changing. And I think it's positive, it's good that young people are coming and saying, we need the background, but we know already what human rights advocacy actually is. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Luxa?
Okay, so I work for the Council of Europe, as Surhan said, so I'm going to talk about the Council of Europe Youth Department practice. And just to confess to those who are younger in this room, I also came the first time to this very youth center in a training for trainers in human rights education, where I was also particularly paralyzed by the use of microphones, so I think I didn't speak for 2 days in the plenary, which I think maybe some of you might echo as an experience. And I think I discovered with the practice of human rights education as we do it in the youth sector of the Council of Europe, something that I learned from participants in a recent training course that we did in Strasbourg. We can call the eternal sunshine, especially in these very gray days, like the one outside right now. Now, I think what's really at the core of the way we practice human rights education in the Council of Europe, in the youth sector, because there are also other sectors that practice human rights education, also focused more on legal professionals, focused on other sectors as well, focusing on formal education. I think what's very special in the way we have done it over these more than 25 years, actually, is this focus on building a culture of human rights. And this has been very much, I think, very, very much at the core of what we do. And coming from this understanding that the court, the legal system, which is very valuable and very important, cannot do the job alone. And probably if it will only rest on institutions, it would not be enough. And I think this is the source of it. Now, I'm sitting here instead of Rui Gomes, who was supposed to be with us and who has also been very much at the heart of this program in the last years. And you ask, how was this long arc of human rights education in the Council of Europe? And instead of going, I'm a historian by training, so I'm very tempted by timelines. So instead of going into timelines, I would like to go into characteristics. And those of us who have had the pleasure to have lectures on human rights from Rui will remember this slide where he used to say, or I think he still says actually, but that human rights are human, and human again. And I would like to say that our human rights education youth program is also human and human and human again. And I think it's human because when it was launched here in November 2000 in this very room, which is also I would say, the heart of the human rights education youth program, it was launched also at the demand of young people. And it's not that we invented human rights education or discovered it in the Council of Europe in 2000, is that in 2000 there was this decision to actually commit the institution and commit the sector to a program. And I think that was very important. It stemmed out from this experience of the All Different, All Equal campaigns, which also resonates with a bit what Matthias said today, that it is always in the, or maybe not always, but it's very often that in the Council of Europe, it's young people who push the boundaries of the system. And if there's anything that this history should tell us, is that there is this possibility that young people under civil society push the boundaries of the system and make it progress. And we should take some hope out of that. So, and I think it comes also out of this tradition of youth movements to claim rights and to face resistance and to fight a bit this Don Quixote fight and see it through. Then it's human because it's also human and imperfect in its application, and it evolved over 20 years with practice. It never stayed the same. In 2002, we had Compass in its first version, and Compass would not be the bestseller of the Council of Europe if there would not be so many partners in this room who translated it into so many languages with, may I dare say, very few resources and even more limited support from the Council of Europe. I think this we should be proud of because it's really important. And it's also really, really strong that human rights education is localized. You said, Mary, some years ago. It's also important that we can practice it in our languages and make it accessible to those who do not have the chance to come to the European youth centers. Then we have a whole system of training around it, coming with the training of trainers, the activists as well, because we also need activists, not only educators. with the national training courses, which also make it further, bring it down close to connect this European level with the local one. With the study sessions that bring together the international youth organizations, so the community can really, really gravitate around it, with the grants of the European Youth Foundation. And I think maybe you mentioned times are hard, and yes, times are really hard, but times were hard before. And I've not been here at the first Human Rights Education Youth Forum. I've been here the first time in 2009. But I'm looking at this room. I think we do have some resources. We do have this room. We do have the centers. There are some people in this room that I stepped into this room the first time together with them. And I think this community of real praxis that also changes and influences and helps us evolve is really something that is a true achievement in the way we do it. And I stop here.
Thank you. So I think it's a good reminder that whatever happens in this room doesn't stay in this room, right? It's an exception. Thank you. Elena?
Oui. Bonjour encore. Oui.
Yes, good morning again. I can see that you're putting on your headphones. I let you put on your headphones.
OK. Donc, je voulais amener une perspective.
Okay, I wanted to bring a somewhat special perspective to this panel, and I'm going to tell you about the change that I have seen at the United Nations since 1995, 30 years ago, when I started working for the United Nations. At the time, I was a young human rights teacher, trainer, like many among you, 26, 27 years old. And before, I had been assistant at the Rome University. I was a volunteer human rights trainer. Since I started working for the United Nations, one of the first missions I had was to draft a report on the implementation of the UN Decade on Human Rights Education, which had started a year before. So I was asking my colleagues on what basis I was supposed to draft a report, and someone told me there was a letter that we sent every government so that they explained to us what they had done. I wasn't aware how many answers we had received. Well, two answers from governments on human rights education. And in one of the answers, there were no real initiatives. It was just lip service. So you can imagine that the report that I was drafting, and then it had to be approved by all kinds of levels, was quite thin document. I still have it. I have printed this 30-year-old report for the United Nations. You can have a look later on, so you can see what I produced back then. So at the time, I was also looking for international partners because I was new, and I was going to put in place a international program. So I was looking for people who had experience in human rights and human rights education, so that I can organize international cooperation with them for the office. Now, there were very few of them. There was Amnesty International, and there was the Canadian Human Rights Council. Equitas is the current name of that body. And then there was UNESCO and a few regional initiatives. Of course, in addition to the work that the Council of Europe was doing already, had been doing since the antiques. There was Human Rights Education Associates, TBA Phillips, was the head of that organization, which had just been set up and was becoming an important international actor. There were very few university programs in '95, and the resources available were rare and, of course, not available online. This is the last report from July 2025. If you have a look at it, it's not so different from the other report from from 30 years ago, because it's the same boring presentation. You can see, you don't feel like reading it when you have a look at it. But if you do, you will be surprised by the wealth of relevant information supplied by the 34 different governments that answered, especially from Latin America. Of course, we haven't been able to include every piece of information in the report. If you look around in this room and the number of people representing the different bodies and national organizations. And we have also mentioned the adoption of the 2011 United Nations Declaration on Education, which was very important. In 2006, an intergovernmental organization was set up, and it has a special mandate linked to human rights education. And within the council, there is an interregional group composed of 8 governments, which is supposed to promote human rights education within the framework of the United Nations. And in Geneva, there is also a working group which is made up of more than 50 civil society organizations, and then 2 people here represented in the room, Lisa and Sean. Yes. And this working group works to promote human rights education, and Manfred has also mentioned that there are very many opportunities today open to young people to learn about human rights. So human rights education has progressed a lot, although it was slow progress, but it was definitely progress, universal one in terms of programs and methods. It's obvious that today's reaction to human rights is negative, and that it has an effect on our work, and that we absolutely need to go on with our efforts, but we also need to mobilize people within our education communities.
When you were speaking, I look behind you, and there is this forum to further universal human rights education. And you spoke a lot about universalizing also human rights education through the work of the UN. It's crucial, it's very important. And I have seen it, like myself, 2 years ago, when we had a cooperation through the training for human rights educators. We had a colleague educator from Palestine, and in this situation, what's going there, we all know, still continuing human rights education there, you know, in the West Bank. It's really sometimes like a very good reminder to see when you bring the global perspectives to the room and sit together as equals and discuss the matters that concern you in the framework of human rights education. It's very, very rewarding and empowering experience. So thanks for introducing things, and thanks to all of you so far for mentioning names, because it's very good to also have names behind the work that has been done. And of course, it's not inclusive, but it's good to acknowledge people. Natalia.
Thank you so much. And like you said about the names, like what I was listening now, like it's really, there has been, there's so much history and there's so many people who have been working for the human rights education and everything. And in a one way, I feel like I'm a good result of that work that has happened before. So thanks also for the colleagues here in the panel. Because I really think that the human rights education and the long arc of the human rights has really shaped me in a way that who I am today, what kind of a trainer, what kind of an activist, and what kind of a young person even I am today. And I feel like many young people can really nod on this. And I think when we talk about the long arc of human rights, I see it as a dynamic, ever-changing movement, which I'm also happy to say that I have been part of shaping it. But also hearing all the history by the colleagues, there's already so much that has been done. And I really see it as a constantly leading a fight to achieve the social justice and building more inclusive and equitable societies, more peaceful societies. But at the same time, we heard about some of the history, but also the long arc of the human rights is something that happens today. And there's also a lot of pushback, as we're witnessing a huge anti-rights backlash that is taking place globally, from the challenges to gender equality, LGBTQ+ rights, the young people's ability to access safe and affordable sexual and reproductive health, living crisis, housing crisis, employment crisis, all that we're witnessing now. And it's all linked to the human rights and the long arc of it. And this constant backlash, I would rather think the constant fight, that we have our universal rights recognized and protected, that makes us drive and purpose of this human rights education arc even stronger. And like human rights and also the history of accessing rights, young people have had to fight to have their role as an active rights holders seen. As something that we are continually seeing today, that young people are often confused with children, and so are their rights. But human rights education has been central on changing this, and the young people especially changing this. Young people and youth organizations have succeeded on utilizing the arc of human rights education to both benefit and grow from such a human rights knowledge, but to also thrive in a particular spaces where young people are present. And when it comes how the human rights education has evolved over time and how young people have engaged in the space, I will say that historically, human rights has acted as a moral compass, of course. But then social justice movements began to realize the value in linking this with the rights-based approach, knowledge sharing, and community building, all the basic principles that we link to the human rights education. And human rights education has slowly become a part of the formal education, as we see, but this has a persistent and far-reaching barriers, depending on the access, where you live, or whether curriculums include human rights to begin with. And this is where the youth and the civil society organizations come in, where human rights education is provided to the non-formal and informal education spaces, where peer-to-peer learning, no hierarchies, active participation, and inclusion can actually happen. And those organizations play a crucial role in shaping young people's skills and competencies and reaching out to those marginalized youths who do not have access to traditional decision-making spaces. So youth organizations and the provision of human rights education through non-formal education is critical when we are building inclusive and peaceful societies. They are really the guiding points to help young people understand and access their rights. As we know, it is essential to know your rights in order to claim your rights, and boosting them into political or decision-making spaces. It is ultimately allows young people to make informed decisions for themselves and to participate in the democratic processes in order to shape the world where we live in, so that we can have also good and nice times in the future too, if there was nice and good times in the past.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you for this. Kate?
Thank you. So I'm really happy to be on this panel and to be at the forum. I think these 3 days of discussion are going to be really interesting, and I think there's a lot to learn and share between us. And importantly, I hope we can leave with a commitment to action, whether that's action as individuals, as organisations, as governments, as the Council of Europe or the UN. We really need action. So while we reflect on the past and we discuss how to further HRE going forward, I think it's important we don't do so in a sanitised way or disconnected manner that fails to acknowledge the really serious human rights challenges we face today. And Marie from Amnesty, my colleague, she spoke about this earlier, and other people have spoken about it. I just want to add that these challenges are so real, very real. You just mentioned Palestine. As we sit here today, the genocide in Gaza continues. Conflict is fueling grave human rights violations around the world. The freedom I have to speak here as a woman today is denied to women in Afghanistan. Many groups, racialized groups, LGBTQI people, people with disabilities, and other marginalized groups, such as refugees, are excluded and dehumanized every single day. In 1948, the world made a commitment to human rights for all, and education, as Manfred said, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other subsequent conventions on education, fundamental freedoms and human rights were clearly part of the purpose. Yet, the long arc to social justice and human rights eludes us. So where and how does human rights fit in, and how is it evolved? I mean, clearly we all believe in this room human rights education is central to the change we're speaking. And I want to speak just a little bit about my own experience that links, obviously because I work for Amnesty, to how HRE has evolved in Amnesty over time. So I think Manfred said that he was chosen to speak first because he had the longest arc, but I got a pretty long arc as well, and a rainbow of experiences. And I first worked for Amnesty, I'd like to say I was just a child, but I wasn't, in 2003 to 2006. And then I went away and I worked for the UN, I worked for the Malala Fund, Save the Children, and I came back in 2022 to this current role. And during that time, human rights across the Amnesty movement has evolved considerably. And it's, we've heard from Elena, who also worked for Amnesty for a while, that human rights education was already well established in Amnesty back in the early 2000s when I worked there. But undoubtedly today it's stronger, it's richer, it's more diverse. We're addressing themes from climate change to children's rights to freedom of expression and much more. So within Amnesty, we have our strategic framework, and we call human rights education a core capability, which is our kind of internal language to say that human rights education is a central pillar in our work. We have dedicated human rights educators working across more than in more than 60 of our national entities. And I'm tempted to say, could all the Amnesty HRE people put their hand up, because there's a lot of Amnesty HRE colleagues here today, and I hope you get a chance to speak and talk to them over the next 3 days. The impact of our work in Amnesty is it was already impactful back in the 2000s, but now, I think it's impressive. In 2024, we reached more than 3 million people, and over 60% of those were young people aged between 12 and 24. So you see, we really are talking to a young and powerful demographic. Human rights education in Amnesty is what we call, I think Marie mentioned it, action-orientated, so it's really designed to equip learners and activists to know, claim, and defend their human rights, as you said. Over the years, we've adapted our approaches. We've got a large e-learning platform. We have human rights gaming apps, and they sit alongside, sort of more traditional methodologies. I think an important recognition in our work and in our practice every day is, again, the point that Marie made. It needs to be localized, it needs to be contextually rooted, anti-racist and decolonial. So HRE within Amnesty is evolving. Looking outside of Amnesty, I also see evolution. We've got, the 5th decade for human rights, the World Programme for Human Rights Education, the SDGs, the commitments made in 2015 in Target 4.7 included education for human rights and many, many more legal commitments and policy commitments. However, HRE, I believe, is still a niche area. It's often seen as an add-on and it's not prioritized. It shouldn't be, to build understanding and respect for the enjoyment of human rights through education, it shouldn't be considered radical, nor should it be considered optional. These are part of the commitments, as my colleagues here on the panel have said, made by governments for decades. So HRE must continue to evolve to address the challenges that we're facing today. We simply cannot be complacent. We're living in a global context of a growing anti-rights discourse. We're hearing narratives of fear every day, repression and control are kind of invisibly or often blatantly woven into the media, social media, and they're creating the space for authoritarian practices to expand. They're undermining human rights, the rule of law. And so I think all of us as educators, as policymakers, we have a role to deliver on the commitments to make HRE accessible from the youngest children and throughout all of life, from pre-primary through to wherever all of us are on the arc of that journey. Because it's really only by knowing our rights, it's only through HRE that we can claim and defend them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate, and all of you. Just to say, and before we move to the question, right, thank you so much to all of you for your contributions, and also about the comment about who was chosen first and this kind of stuff. Actually, it reminded me of this thing that for us, like at least in this youth center in Strasbourg, we have this idea that, do you want to be called human rights educator? You are human rights educator. Like, you stop someone in the street, do you want to be a human rights educator? Yes? Yes, you are. That's fine. And the idea of this, it's a little bit, I'm making it a bit more funny, but it comes from Compass, right? The manual that you say you can take it and use. You don't need to be a legal expert to do this. You take it, you prepare yourself, and you can go and... For me, for example, I started calling myself human rights educator without knowing maybe a lot of things I didn't know about human rights, I said I am human rights educator. But it was a good starting point, and it relates to what you said, Manfred, about young people coming to study like master's degrees, knowing they need it. They know that they need it, so they are there to also upgrade their skills. And I think it's kind of important. And this also leads to this question that I have for you, and the way I want to do it is that we take maybe 1 or 2 responses from the panel and then the rest from the audience. So listen carefully to the question. So it's about the benefits of human rights education. We spoke partly about it in the first opening statements. And of course, in every human rights educator's life, there comes a moment when a donor, there are not so many donors these days, unfortunately, policymaker, if you're advocating, public authority asks, or even maybe, Ida mentioned about friends, in this, it's a valid, friends and family, they might ask. Human rights education is important, but how does it benefit those engaged? What is the added value for learners? What is the end goal of all this? So my question to you is, looking back to all the years of shaping human rights education across the globe, what is the benefit of human rights education? And why do we need to continue nurturing it? Nurturing is this fancy millennial term that is taking care of it. So why? What is the point of all this? So maybe we can start with one of you. We have Manfred and first, and then we go to the other.
Of course, donors, they always want to have this kind of log frames, and then you have to have quantitative data. You have to, what is actually that you achieved with this 8 master programs, etc. And did you improve and have you more quantity? So of course we have more students because we and more alumni. But what did they reach actually? And I think we have a fairly good record. So we have to show in 1 year, 2 years after they graduate, who has already a human rights job. And as more as you have, as better you're rated. But in reality, actually, most of the people whom we educate really make a real career in human rights work. Wherever I go, and when I was Special Rapporteur on Torture for the UN, I traveled to so many different countries, and there was almost no country where not somebody came, or you meet ministers, and then they said, by the way, I was studying 20 years ago in the European Master or in the African Master program, and that makes me always very proud. So, it's they are really human rights professionals. Many of them are also becoming human rights educators. Another point is that I mean, it's not only students. I mean, I have been training teachers, military, police, civil servants, whatever. And you can make a difference. No? If you, for instance, training the police in Austria, at the end of the training, they said, okay, by the way, yeah, the police is the biggest human rights organization in Austria. And said, yes, but you have to live up to this. But kind of changing, because the police always felt we are only the violators of human rights, and we also were training them. You are protecting health, you're protecting life, you're protecting security, etc. That also are human rights that you are protecting. So I think it has an impact, and in particular, certain trainings of professionals is extremely important to broaden the human rights culture.
Thank you.
I still hope, maybe I might not have the figures, that the end goal is to reduce or possibly eradicate human rights violations. That's, I think, why we do it eventually, but sometimes we have to recall it that that's why we do it. And that means that the benefit is not necessarily always individual, but the benefit is collective. And that is also something to recall, that we do human rights education. I'm looking more here at the political mission of human rights education. We do this that in the long run, we see the number significantly reduced. It is true that the more we do human rights education nowadays, and also in my experience, the more we'll become aware in the first stage of how many human rights violations actually exist. And that is also progress in itself, although it might be a very depressing progress. And sometimes young people in this room also say, oof, it's a very depressing day. And why? Because we've also learned that we had these rights, and we knew somehow instinctively that this was wrong, and now I know there is law that also says it's wrong, so it's double depressive. So I think for me that's the benefit of human rights education, and that's the political commitment that we make. And it's not only about states, it's also about us as communities or organizations and so on, and which is sometimes even in climates that are sometimes going against and so on, is even more important. And then secondly, I also deal with log frames in my daily job. They're not my particular favorite thing to do. And indicators and so on. I would like to still recall that education is not, let me put it blunt and provocatively, is not factory built. Yes, we are not products of, and I really like the way you said it, Natalia, I was shaped, but the way we practice human rights education in this room and in other rooms is that agency remains with the learner. And I think that's a very important aspect in the quality of the praxis of human rights education that we must conserve. So at the end of the day, human rights education is also an act of hope that might not give the result tomorrow.
Very good opening also to you, human rights educators. So I see you behind, yeah, you will be helped now with the microphone, and then I see you. So you can, you. Sorry, I don't know your names, but you can start. And it doesn't need to be a question. You can also bring your point of view.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Merci pour... Thank you very much. I would like to thank the panelists for their excellent presentations. It was very interesting, and it's enabled me to learn a great deal on the way human rights are being promoted. I'm Amadi Yacoub. I'm from Cameroon, and of course, I'm a Camerooni educator, and I work for ALDEPA, which is an ONG which does a great deal to promote human rights. And in the extreme north, especially, I would like to know something. Could the panelists tell us about their own experiences regarding the approaches? Have they developed to include marginalized communities, young people from marginalized communities, because we would like to be able to offer them more protection and especially bring the message to marginalized communities.
Thank you. Maybe I'm asking to the panel, maybe you can also see who wants to respond to this, but before that, you have the floor. You'll get the microphone.
Hello, thank you. I'm Molly Taylor from the UK, so I feel really grateful to be here, and it's my first time accessing the Council of Europe Youth Centre. As we know, like since Brexit, a lot of young people in the UK don't realise that the Council of Europe is separate, so they don't understand like the opportunities that we can get, so I feel really grateful. I wanted to share a quick reflection on how human rights education has impacted me personally, and then I have a question as well. So for me, thank you so much for sharing your personal lived experiences. So I had multiple human rights and children's rights violated as a child, and I didn't realise that because it was normalised, and that's how people get away with it. And so through learning about my rights, I've reclaimed power, and I think that's so important. And I often talk about the process of empowerment. Not many people look into that, but the key word there is power, and how when you understand your rights, you then have power within yourself. You feel that confidence, you don't feel worthless anymore. You feel like you have the ability to do it with others and the community. And I think one point I wanted to share was that before I learnt my rights, I was so angry and I was traumatized because of what happened. And obviously when young people go through trauma, they're very angry and they get into violence and offending. And I was very close to that route. And it's because I didn't realize what had happened to me. And so since accessing my rights, like I've turned into a very compassionate human. And I think that's something we need to take away, that despite there's a lot of polarization happening, is that there's a reason why that's happening. A lot of those people that are in those spaces are traumatized themselves, and they haven't had the same open dialogue that we have in their communities. And it's something that I've seen in the UK with the far right increasing and reform. But one of my questions, which was really interesting, I think it was Natalia that touched on this, was about the youth sector and how we need to collaborate both non-formally and with formal education. In England's context, the non-formal education youth work has been cut by 1 billion since 2010, and it's something I know Maurizio, who's on the Youth Council, is very passionate about. And as a result, we're seeing like a shrinking civic space across the country and no youth centres anymore. And whilst youth work is adapting, it's become really tough. And even the education sector, like as a child, I didn't learn political education. It's very much like a last thoughtful thing. And also languages, like a lot of people here speak multiple languages today. And I'm so inspired because in the UK, we don't really learn languages. And so my question was, any panelists, do you have any examples, like key examples that stick in your mind of where non-formal and formal education have come together and collaborated on something really powerful? Because it's something I'd like to take back to the UK. Thank you so much.
Thank you to both of you. I think I want to invite one more person, but not for the question, for the comment. So I think you can go.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Linda Nkechi Emmanuel from Nigeria. So my comment is basically about the benefits, talking personally from my experience from learning human rights education. I was a Hay tutor, human rights education for youth. We were trained in September at Molina in Spain. Yeah, so for me, I think one of the benefits I have experienced personally, aside what has been mentioned by the panelists, is I got the opportunity to appreciate diversity. Yeah, if with that knowledge, I'm able to appreciate, okay, I now know why, I want to know why this person is acting the way he or she is, and also appreciate why they are acting that way. Also, another point is I learned to promote and respect human dignity. So with that knowledge, honestly, before, normally I would just see it as normal, even when human dignity is being disrespected. Sometimes, culturally and structurally, you find it looks as if it's normal, but then, having this knowledge, I found out it's not normal. And then also the confidence to speak out is there after the knowledge. So I think basically that's it for me. And just to add to the grounded knowledge, I now know, okay, there are laws, there are policies, and then who to report to, where to take these issues to, and the likes of it. So I think that's my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it's a very good way to also, those of you who want to share your practice and testimonies, thank you for doing this. Just going back to the panel, about the non-formal education question, I would rather maybe park it for the later episode of the panel. But if you want to respond to some of the others, Kate? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to the question on, reaching marginalised groups. Maybe not to go into all the sort of different methodologies, but hopefully, my colleagues from Amnesty national offices can share some practical experiences, because we have a lot of work where we're working with different marginalised groups, young refugee children in formal educations or in non-formal education, LGBTQI communities. We had a big project called the Diversus Project in Latin America that spanned 4 national countries, that really, was empowering and educating young LGBTQI people plus their allies to know and claim their rights, and also beginning to try and influence policy. And then I wanted to talk about some work that we're doing in West Africa, in Senegal, Burkina Faso, and Sierra Leone. We have a project that now I think is going into its sort of 3rd phase, where we're working on issues of female genital mutilation. So we're working with very marginalised, rural, economically marginalised communities, and building dialogue and co-creating knowledge around the harm that FGM causes. And I think these are some really kind of clear examples of how, we are finding ways. We need to work together, and we shouldn't also go with the sense that we're only the ones holding the knowledge. And I think I didn't say this in my previous thing, but when I worked at Amnesty the first time in this team, I used to fly off here, there, and everywhere doing workshops. And now, of course that needs to be local knowledge, local partners, local actors. It isn't for others to come in. So I think, people do understand rights, but it's about how we talk about them and how, we reach all people with their human rights. So they're just a few examples that hopefully, and as I say, others here from Amnesty can really help, I'm sure from lots of other organisations.
Thank you, Kate. Natalia?
I'm going to continue a bit on this one, but when we, you asked about the marginalized communities, and in the European Youth Forum, we work with the Roma, we work with the Muslim, we work with the Jews, we work with the LGBTQI and many, many more other groups. And I really think that those marginalized groups are really in the core and in the front of the human rights educations, because those violations, those barriers, those class ceilings, all of those intersections are really the core issues that we are tackling when it comes to human rights education. And I really think that many youth organizations have now started to incorporate aspects about racial justice or decolonization to their work, and that is a clear result of having the marginalized youth shaping the human rights education and really having the examples. And also that is the reason why we have so many of the marginalized groups now also leading many of the movements, not maybe yet in all of the institutions, but in the streets. What's happening in Serbia to what we're seeing from our members in Belarus or in the Pride marches of Budapest, those are the marginalized groups, and those are the young people especially who are leading the change and shaping the world that they want to see and the democratic world.
Thank you, Natalie. Ruxa, you can.
Yes, I mean, just to say, I will not do the 5 minutes of advertisement for Council of Europe publications, but in our human rights education resources constellation, there is more than just Compass. There's Miros that deals with anti-gypsies. There's many more others. I invite you to go downstairs and look at them. They are highly adaptable because this is also the way we think to make these manuals that, you know, address many people in many situations. So we also highly recommend that people adapt whatever activity, whatever content they do to their local realities. And then, of course, we also work in the Council of Europe with marginalized communities, supporting their empowerment. But I think there's another element that is particularly important, is this question of solidarity, that we work with the community as a whole on these aspects of solidarity so that we can actually advance together and share power. And I'm very happy that, that a colleague from UK mentioned this idea of power, because human rights is also a lot about sharing power.
Yeah, maybe it's fine. Yeah, thank you. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to the audience. We're moving on. Oh, it's just one reminder also that about the history, because we are still at the recent history. And you know, I remember like the country where I come from, it's called Georgia, it's in South Caucasus. And you know, it's not considered to be a developed country. Global North, it doesn't qualify to be part of it yet. And there, you know, you see like at the beginnings, usually it's my experience, when you see you have something like human rights education, something, you say like, we need to have an international consultant hired for this, because you people, you don't know that well. You know, and these kind of like attitudes also that are there sometimes in a way, it also goes a little bit against this localization spirit that is mentioned here, because if we don't know, and then recently I started to look at human rights indexes, you know, so if you see the countries in the global north and those who are like high achievers in terms of their obligations to human rights, and I see about the history of those countries, on what some of those countries did for other countries, and I'm meaning colonialism in these terms, you know, and human rights violations that were taking place in other countries on behalf of those countries, and no, many of them are apologizing, right? It's a little bit, you know, maybe we need a human rights education also. We need to hire consultants from Global South to do the human rights education for the countries in Global North, you know? Why not? So, the second question, which I would want to make it a little bit more participatory, it is a statement. So it's connected to your question about non-formal education. So I'm going to make a statement. And those of you who agree with this statement, I invite you to raise your hand, right? And then look around. If you don't agree, you don't do anything. You just stay as you are, including the panel. And then we engage into a little bit of a discussion on this. And consider consider every aspect of it and understand the statement as you wish to understand. Don't overthink, you know, just first response that comes to you. So, human rights education can never be truly sustainable if it is not integrated into the formal education curriculum. Human rights education can never be truly sustainable if it is not integrated into the formal education curriculum. So those of you who agree, raise your hands. Okay, I like this. Okay, so most people, no, not most, I think more majority is on yes side. There are some people also in the panel who disagree. So I think I would rather start with someone who disagrees from the audience. Yes, go ahead. You will be given microphone now, soon.
I disagree because it's in formal education might really support, but there are places where formal education is not really supportive, especially in developing countries where the education is not doesn't have a good quality. People are really not much open for the formal education, and I would say what should be really done at that holding. We touched upon the earlier that power imbalances, and it's for human rights education to be sustainable. Holding accountable governments who don't really support the organization of informal movements is really more sustainable, would be more sustainable, and the informal movements have to be more supported instead of making it formalized. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So one from the panel who agrees. Yeah, Manfred and Kate, you can both take the space, and then we go back.
Agrees with your statement. Yeah. So I think I wanted to start because I was kind of like this. So I think all human rights education has value, formal and non-formal, and they're very important. And those experiences that impact that learning can be sustained in non-formal education. The way I understood your question was more in terms of sustainability, was about long-term rights-respecting societies. And if we want to build long-term rights-respecting societies, we have to expand the reach of human rights education. And in that case, we need to embed it in formal education. So I think, and it needs to be at all levels. And if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 4, which is about inclusive, quality, education and rights-based education, includes human rights education. It's from pre-primary and it's lifelong learning. So it's both formal and non-formal. But I think embedding human rights education, yes, as the colleague who just spoke says, it has to be, we know there's enormous challenges in the education sector. There's a lot of education that's not quality, but if we think about quality education, it has to be rights-based, it has to include human rights education. So I think if we want to make it sustainable for a rights-respecting society, it should be within the formal education system, and there are obligations for that to happen. So.
Thank you, Kate. So we have Elena and Manfred, and then we figure out what to do next.
Moi, je voulais ajouter que quand même...
I wanted to add that the importance of sustainable learning is there in formal and non-formal education. The focus has to be on sustainability. It depends on the method. I've seen both examples. In some cases, people have really been empowered by education, and I've also seen victims of human rights abuses who became human rights defendants because they were empowered. I saw young girls in marginalized communities and children in tribal India who thought that their future was a suicidal future because they had no hope, and with the human rights education they were brought back to school because a local Indian organization was aware of their problems, and one of these young girls became a human rights defender and came to Geneva to the Human Rights Council to tell the council about young children's problems in India. We mentioned magic, so human rights education can be magic. People who didn't have any dignity at the beginning can work for human rights the rest of their lives. And I have colleagues that do human rights education in various countries, and a lot depends on the method. And these colleagues confirm that you have to have the local context as the starting point. That's the main thing. You have to start out from the realities of learners and build the program on that. So human rights education can be efficient if the methodology is the right one. And I think you don't have to improvise. You have to prepare human rights education. Trainers have to prepare those training courses very well. This is what I've wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you. If you don't mind, we give the audience first, and then we come back to you, Manfred, to also play a little bit with the game. Thank you, Elena. Maybe we go with you, Matthias, then we go with Manfred.
Just very briefly, I think it's a very important issue on the respective importance and role of the formal and non-formal education. I would agree very much that one aspect is that through formal education, of course, the outreach is much bigger. And that is in itself a very important consideration. But the other one is also based on what I said before, that we cannot separate democracy and human rights. And if we apply that on education, and if we agree that you cannot have a quality education, a very strong program on education for democratic culture, civic education, whatever form, you cannot imagine having that without having that component on human rights, because it would be incomplete. And secondly, you know, I also think that they have enormously a lot in common. We're talking about the skills and competencies and attitudes that are necessary for both. If you go into the most basic, I mean, you will not be able to have an effective civic education, human rights education, without transmitting empathy, both emotional and cognitive, and critical thinking. So that, again, is also another argument why a strong formal education component is essential for the sustainability of the extremely important and indispensable non-formal component of it.
Thank you, Matthias. Manfred?
I mean, I said I agree strongly with the statement, because at a time when so many people all over the world are critical and skeptical about democracy, about human rights and the rule of law, if they are voting for authoritarian parties, and that we have in Europe as much as we have it in the rest of the world, formal human rights education, whether you call it democracy or civic education, I don't care. The human rights are at least the most clearly defined. That's why I prefer human rights education. Is if you really want to change that and to foster a human rights culture, you need formal education. And as I said, you need to have it as a mandatory subject from kindergarten to universities. That's the one thing. But of course, when even well-functioning democracies don't do that, of course it is much more difficult in dictatorships to now, and there I agree with the colleague who spoke before, it's very, very difficult to say, can you really do a good human rights education program in, I don't want to name countries now, but of course, so we should start in the more better functioning democracies. But the one doesn't exclude the other. Of course, you always need non-formal education. In the Global Campus, we have 8 master programs, that's degree programs. But then we have so many non-degree courses, we have so many e-learning courses, MOOCs, etc., that are complementing and supplementing what we are doing. We have special courses on cinema, human rights and advocacy, or whatever, human rights defenders. Of course, you need also non-formal education in so many different settings, but I did agree, because I feel the formalized form is the one that is more sustainable if it is well done, of course.
Thank you. I mean, I think you said so many things. I'm not trying to summarize, because I'm also looking at Felisa, and she's analytically listening. And that also is a reassuring fact for me. But I do want to give the floor to Ruxa for the final chapter of this question, maybe.
I have this former young person in me that when it hears mandatory, it goes a bit against. But that's just a former young person. Yes, I agree. Formal education is also an obligation. If states are serious about their obligation to promote human rights, then formal education, which is also where states control the curricula and organize it in many of the cases, is the place where they would, first act. However, not all of us have access to formal education, and some of us still alive today might still need access to human rights education. So it is sustainable from a certain point on, but we are in this here and now. And I think we need all forms of education where human rights education can be practiced true to its core, true to human rights. And I very much like what the colleagues in Timișoara are doing because they're the youth center that also has our quality label, has also a network of youth centers in the neighborhoods, and their idea was that people can have access to youth work and to a certain degree to human rights education by their peers within 15 minutes of walk. And I think these are also these important spaces that make it sustainable, where people feel free, also outside of what sometimes formal education can be a space of coercion, grading, and so on. Feel free to explore these topics, which is also the heart of human rights education.
Yeah, you pretty much said everything that I was also thinking. I, of course, see the benefit of embedding the human rights education in the formal educational system because it sets the common standard. But I also think at the same time that we as a society, as a world, we give very little respect towards the non-formal education. And we actually, in many places and in many rooms, don't even know what is non-formal education. Many people in this world cannot explain what is non-formal education. They have very different kind of explanations, but they really cannot understand the core idea of it. And I think the non-formal educational spaces are the spaces where the young people can take on what they have learned and implement that in practice. The essential values that we have in the non-formal education, such as the peer-to-peer learning, active participation, includes lifelong learning, all of these, they really are in the non-formal spaces, like there they are very well implemented and in the core of the whole process. So I do see the benefit of having it in the formal educational system, but I do think that we should give way more respect towards the non-formal education and also more understanding of it. And I think that should be embedded to the formal system, but we still should have the non-formal educational spaces equally respected.
Yeah, I want to come back because I think I don't think any of us are disagreeing, but I think it's how we're conceptualizing formal education. We're conceptualizing formal education as the factory, whoever said that, and it shouldn't be a factory. It should be rights-based in the way children access it. It should be rights-based in what they experience in the classroom, how they participate, and what they learn. So let's scrap the idea of how I learned at school and think about quality education as it's described in the SDGs, or let's think about the right to education and how it's described. It should have human rights as part of it, and it should be lifelong. So that, as you say, we should bring those same experiences or methodologies that are in the non-formal into the formal, and not think we have to have, here's where I take an exam. I'm not going to take an exam on human rights education. It's going to be part of what I learn and live and experience, and it's going to shape all of us. So, sorry.
Thank you so much. Well, indeed, I mean, important thing, learner-centeredness, start from the learners, cooperation is important. Sometimes, it's part of the cooperation is also to acknowledge differences, it's fine. It's not necessarily differences in values, right? But then approaches, like, for example, when somebody did a master's research on participatory action research in a school based on competencies, self-assessment, something youth worker is saying, I need students to self-assess themselves, if they are empathetic or not. Teachers are saying, no, teachers should assess students if they are empathetic or not. And then you sit together and you also agree on something, because you also agree that there are differences in how you see participation, how you see, because the systems are different. But thanks for bringing this discussion. The follow-up question, do you agree with this statement or not, now that you listened to the discussion? The statement, I will repeat. So, human rights education can never be truly sustainable if it is not integrated into the formal education curriculum. If you agree, raise your hand. So less people. So, well, I mean, in a typical non-formal education, we would do something that is called debriefing. Now, we would ask you, how do you feel? But, pardon? Yeah, we would amend this. But now the statement is a problem. Okay, all opinions are welcome. But I do have the follow-up question. I mean, the follow-up question is to this panel, right? It's the last question. We are good with time, I think. The last question that I need to prep a little bit. So it's about, question is about responding resistance towards human rights education. We spoke a little bit about it. Sometimes human rights education faces resistance, whether from political, cultural, or institutional forces. In some cases, human rights education is reframed, renamed, or softened to avoid criticism or to prevent it from being restricted or removed. How do you respond to this challenge, and what strategies can ensure that core principles of human rights education are preserved even when it has to adapt to such pressures? So may I start with Elena first, and then again we will invite the audience.
Donc ça c'est un thème que au niveau des Nations Unies.
So this is something which you'll be able to understand better in the UN. For example, when I look at training for my colleagues, they say, "Oh well, we are taught that human rights are really Western rights. They're not universal rights, really. They're not something that apply to us, but they're just they're for other people." I think that there was a quote from Kofi Annan, actually, who said, it's not the people who have ever said that human rights are relevant to everyone, but it's rather governments which said that. It's the authorities. So that's something to think about already. The fact that not everyone thinks that human rights are universal. Now, when the question is cultural, it harks back to something we said at the beginning. How do we do it? Do we pick up the UN manual, the textbook there, translate it into French and then put it into practice? Is that a good idea? Perhaps we could start with the context where we've got the people who are studying human rights, and we adapt the context. For example, I found out that UNESCO had a research project for the 20th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, so it's quite a long time ago, and it was a research project which lasted 2 years, which was carried out by the UNESCO Philosophy Division. And it was a big. It was John Ersch, who was a major Swiss philosopher who guided the research. And the project was to gather texts which reflected traditions which show the universality of human rights over time and in space. And the book was called, well, let me give you the title. It's not exactly digestible today. But it was, we're talking about 1968 here, so it was called The Right to Be a Man, an anthology, a universal anthology of human rights. So we already knew in 1968 that human rights were anchored in all contexts, in all traditions. This is a massive book. It's about 600 or 700 pages. But it seems that we haven't learned the lesson, because instead of doing that, instead of looking into each culture to see how we can take into account the culture and take into account the principles in the culture, no, people are coming in from the outside and sticking it on top of any culture. And people just rebel, and they say, well, no, that's not us. And regarding the cultural issues, I would like to repeat that you've got to start. It's got to be person-centered learning. You can't impose it from above, because that's the only way you're going to get anywhere.
I think it's a very strong message for all of us. Manfred?
I mean, I referred already before, and you can have this annual report downstairs also. Why do we talk about persistence of frontline human rights educators? I give you 4 short examples. We have an Arab master in human rights and democracy. It's based in Beirut. They were continuing providing education during the war between Israel and Hezbollah. We have a university in the West Bank, Beardside University. They are continuing under very, very difficult circumstances, human rights education. We have a master program in the Caucasus region. We have a university in Kiev that is still, even today, continuing, mostly online, human rights education. In Belarus, we unfortunately had to stop because all our professors and students were either in jail or in exile. We have an Asian Pacific master program where Myanmar is included. It's almost impossible to still educate in Myanmar. Again, we had to get students out of who actually disappeared or then have been tortured, etc. So in the Central Asia master program, we could not put the term human rights anymore into the program. We call it now Master in Democracy and Sustainability, because if we would have said Master in Democracy and Human Rights, the Ministry of Education in Kyrgyzstan would not have accredited the program. So there's a lot of resistance against human rights education, and we have to be stubborn in order to continue. One last point is, because you also talked about renaming and whatever, I mean, very often now this term of ethical education comes up. So we don't need human rights education, we need ethical education. And that gets a little bit, it's a bit fluffy, not very clear. It gets religion in there. Religious organizations are not the best human rights defenders, I would think. So I think I would actually feel that human rights education is the better way of creating a human rights culture than ethical education.
So those who can and are not surrounded by visible obstacles can call it human rights education. There is no need to invent new terms. Thank you for this. I'm going back to you guys. So I think I can take you because I know you. It's a bit of a nepotism, you see. No. Yes, and then.
Thank you so much. I was thinking about who is resisting human rights education or human rights. And I wanted to share an experience because it was coming forward that maybe it's usually the states or those who are governing. But I think that things are changing as well. And those who are human rights defenders can also experience that they don't want to talk about human rights because they are being refused from them. So I wanted to just share an experience from a human rights defender who is from Gaza, a friend of mine, who it was a strong human rights fighter in Gaza, and then she completely lost the trust in it because she was deprived from these rights. And I think that it was really hard for me to invite her back, in a sense. But I think what helped was to talk honestly about our experiences with human rights and not just how we define human rights, if they're Western or not, or if they're universal or not. Because I think at the end of the day, it's how we experience if our rights are given to us when we are most vulnerable. And I think that honest conversation about how we experience democracy today, depending on who we are and where we live and the times changing, And if we're here or there, if we're insiders or outsiders, depending on the time again, that honest conversations are necessary than keeping the conversation to what are human rights, who defines human rights, because these issues have become very personal. It's not just out there anymore, and the world is very global. So I would just invite everyone to not just have a conversation about what are human rights in definition, but also how do we experience them, and in the same country with the backgrounds that we have, and who we represent, gender, nationality, skin color, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. So you can go.
All right, thank you. I would say that as we all talk, that this is a very urgent thing when you talk of human rights, but when it comes to resistance, I feel like the best thing to do is to be patient and also not staying silent. In as much as human rights are there, but not everyone knows of human rights. And we also talked about it, that as Elena said, that people would say that these are not human rights, they are Western rights. So if you are to go, especially to the global south, or it's a culture, some of these rights, they are not recognized. So when you face this resistance, it's better, or I would advise that you need to be patient and not staying silent, having a proper dialogue. So this change cannot just happen fast like that. So we need to be patient, having a dialogue, like a respectful dialogue when you face this resistance. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw someone from like behind. There was a hand. Was it you? Oh, it was you. Yeah, I think. Sorry, it was you. Yeah. So maybe. Okay, it was not you, but you can also both. It's fine. You can start and then the other person. But we don't have time for questions. Maybe keep it to the comment. Okay.
Okay. As a comment, I just wanted to highlight that when we're talking about human rights education here, there seems to be an assumption that we can speak of all these identities, and we were talking about marginalized identities earlier. I'm representing IGLIO, which is the International LGBTQI Youth and Student Organization. We work a lot on inclusive education and human rights education, and I think it's really important to highlight that in many countries, including in the Council of Europe region, it is currently illegal to discuss LGBTQI identities, including the country that we're in now. So I think it's very important to bear in mind when we speak of human rights education, how can we be inclusive of these identities in contexts where it's not allowed to be mentioned? Why is that? How do we address that? I'm not seeing much mention of this right now. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I really cannot. It's the last person, and sorry, it's a role of the moderator also to make these painful decisions. But
thanks. I'll try to be quick. But in terms of my question, it's specifically also about what was also mentioned by in regards to the global campus on human rights. And that is, if we were discussing education in particular, what does education look like in terms of advocating for human rights and human rights education in countries where human rights violations are rather not discussed, or where there's a lot of backlash in terms of that when you speak out about that? And on top of that, when it comes to people who advocate for human rights or educators in countries where a lot of things are tolerated or there are violations, how can you protect these individuals who fight for education and try to educate in these regards? Thank you.
thank you. So this is what we do now to have a little bit of a picture. We take Manfred and ask him to respond, and then we take 1 minute of each to conclude the panel, like a closing remarks. Okay?
I mean, this is an excellent question, and we are very, very often faced, what I said before, it's, of course, human rights education also means the skills, and skills, for instance, are advocacy work, very practical work of a human rights defender. Already during the studies, we have many internships, for instance, and where they do very practical work. And in certain countries, this is dangerous. As I said before, it took us quite some time to get students from Myanmar again out of prisons and saving them from torture. And I mean, we also had cases in the Arab world where not students, but people who just graduated and started their advocacy work were actually killed. So how do we protect them? I think we have certain possibilities, being also careful, for instance, when they write certain master theses that is in their home country controversial, that they can do it anonymously, these kind of things. But you cannot fully protect them in their future advocacy work. And that's a huge responsibility. And also when we hear about these human rights violations of our graduates, it's always very, very tough.
Thank you. And I think, even though this is the panel, we will continue discussing this throughout, right? So I also don't want to promote this as the only space. We are just getting started. And maybe we start with you, Ruxa? Oh, we start with you, maybe, if you are happy.
I mean, I think we talked about this resistance to human rights, and by default to human rights education, and I would also link it with resilience. It is, thank you, Amelie, for bringing it up. It is unfortunately a trend that we have continuously seen since 2016, at least, when the review of the implementation of the Charter on Education for Democratic Citizenship and Human Rights Education already said very boldly that in many countries, members of the Council of Europe, human rights educators and activists find it dangerous to identify themselves as such, and the spaces are shrinking, as you rightfully mentioned. And I do not know, I don't know your name, but I do not know human rights not to be personal, because they touch on so much every aspect of our lives that it is eventually a very personal experience, and I think we need to start from that, but also build to the collective one. There's no correct answer. There's multiple forms of resistance. There's the resistance of the learner, there's the resistance of the state, there's the resistance of society to certain taboos. There's no right answer. I think there's just resilience and persistence, as you put it. And as one participant said recently, sometimes it's advocacy in the underground. Sometimes we go low and we protect the spaces and we protect the activists, and that's what we have to do in order to go further. I take a lot of inspiration. I hope you'll take the time to also speak with colleagues from Ukraine who are here in the room, who do fantastic work and do fantastic human rights education under the bombs. This is, I think, a good lesson of resilience that we can all learn from. And I hope the next days also help us in this forum to find common answers, because there's no institution can give the answer to this. It is, I think, in this community of praxis that we can actually find it.
Yes, I want to thank the comment made by IGLIO before the European Youth Forum. I was also in the board of IGLIO, so nice to have an IGLIO member here. But I think when it comes to the resistance, I think the important thing to remember is that resistance towards human rights and human rights education comes from the fear of change and comes from the fear of progress. And this fear comes from those who want to keep the status quo, who want to keep the hierarchy, and who want to keep us unknown and isolated. And ultimately, those who want to keep their power over the expenses of others. And I have one quote that I want to say, but I want to ask, how many of you know Moomins, those like white trolls that Tove Jansson wrote a story about, the Finnish cartoon? Finland is not good at marketing, so I'm happy to see some hands. But there's a nice quote from one character, and the character is called Tuutiki. And Tuutiki said, "Everything is so uncertain, and that is exactly what makes me calm." And we live in an uncertain world, and it might sound weird how the uncertainty can make us feel calm or make Tuutiki feel calm. But it's also good to remember that when things are uncertain, it means that they are not set to stone. So things are not yet decided. So it means that there is space for change. Thank you for all the panelists and the audience as well.
En fait, je voudrais...
In fact, I find that all the themes that we have covered would have deserved a panel, a separate panel each. How can I express any closing remarks for everything that we have heard? Can I just say one practical thing? The United Nations have brought a couple of publications with us on human rights. For instance, you have a brochure on the India program that I mentioned, and it's an Indian organization that put it in place for a tribal community. All that material, all those materials are available, and you can charge them on your phones as well, on the Dalits. And we are here for 3 days with my colleagues, with 3 colleagues from the United Nations, and our work consists in helping you, so don't hesitate to come and see us. I've chatted with some of you already during the coffee break, so please come to us and let's discuss how we can work together in the fields. Because the purpose of this forum is that we set up a professional community of human rights specialists. So we should help one another in a solidary manner.
So I just want to make a few points. First of all, really to emphasize that human rights education should not be seen as an extra or an add-on. It should be seen as central to all education. And that governments have that legal obligation, and they've also made policy commitments. So we really need to think, how do we fill the gaps in access to human rights education? At Amnesty, we continue to stand up for human rights and to resist we're looking for a world where everybody enjoys their human rights. We believe that, we will keep going. We do this through our research, where we're highlighting where human rights violations are occurring. We do this through our advocacy and through our campaigning to build people power and the political pressure to bring about those changes. And we do it through human rights education, as I said. So, and I think the point that Elena's making earlier and others, that human rights education is an approach about co-creating knowledge. It's about understanding that human rights are not, they're not about abstract concepts. They're in our everyday lived experience. But it's also about action, right? It's about action to when we know our rights, we can defend our own rights and the rights of others. And as I said in my opening remarks, we're witnessing the undermining, we're in I think, there have always been human rights violations. It feels somehow we're in a particular moment where we're really witnessing the rolling back of human rights gains that I think we thought we were secure, whether it's about identities or whether it's about, it's about all sorts of things. And we're seeing that a rise or an escalation in authoritarian practices as these anti-rights discourses gain traction, not just in the voices of politicians, but social media and, this polarized world. So I think, human rights education is a really vital tool for building the dialogue and bridging those divisions. And I just want to just read out a few words that were from our Secretary General, if I can find them. So Agnes Kalamar is our Secretary General, and this is, I've taken a bit from a quote she gave for our annual report. So she says, she's talking about Amnesty's human rights education, but I think it refers to all human rights education. So Amnesty's human rights education plays a critical role by teaching skills to resist, disrupt, and transform. Human rights education brings us together, and only by being unified will we assert our rights, be victorious against the forces that seek to divide us, and turn promise of universal respect for human rights into reality, because humanity must win. So I think resist, disrupt, and transform. That's what human rights education can and must do. And I'm really grateful to have been on the panel with so many, excellent points, and to be at this forum, and look forward to learning from everybody here. Thank you.
I think I've been talking too much anyway. So just keep up the good spirit in human rights education. Don't let yourself be threatened. Be resilient, persistent, and stubborn if there are these kind of threats.
Thank you. So we are very soon, I promise, going for a lunch break, but like a couple of things before that. Thank you so much to the panel for this wealth of discussion that we had this morning. Thank you to the audience for your contributions and for listening also. And I want to finish with something. So in this metaphor of arc is built with something, right? In a way, it's arc. And given that you are all here voluntarily, right? We have a hope for that you are here because you want to be here. And given that you all are here because you care about human rights, that we are in confidence of this, I can assure you that each of you contributed, if not maybe like multiple, what do you call the bricks of the arc? If not multiple, at least one brick is yours there. And each brick counts, they matter. And we will have tomorrow about the present, the day after tomorrow about future. We have enough to worry about, ideas, forward-looking. But now, let's take a few seconds, tapping as a sign of acknowledging your contribution, tapping on your own shoulder, and say thank you to yourself for this. And with this, I would like to close this part. Thank you so much, and give the floor to my colleague Vasiliki for a few technical announcements.
Thank you, Sulkan. Hello, everyone. My name is Vasiliki. I am also a member of the organizing team on the side of the Council of Europe, specifically from the European Youth Foundation. By the way, do we have organizations that have EYF funding projects in the room? Can I see raise of hands? Okay, great. So just for the people who don't know, the European Youth Foundation is an important instrument of the Council of Europe to be in partnership with young people and do, among many other things, human rights education. And I was told that this has been already shared with you, but there is also an exhibition of the EYF-funded projects through the special call for Ukraine, which you can be found in the Nordic Room. And I will stop now with the European Youth Foundation to go to practical announcements for lunch. So, lunch starts now and until 3. So there have been no shifts specifically, but we count on your logic thought that 200 people to eat at the same time in the kitchen is kind of impossible. So you can go in like improvised shifts. You have enough time, I think. And then at 3, we meet directly for the working groups. The groups are displayed in all possible screens in the building, and you can see them here. You can see the name of the facilitator, the number of your group, and where you meet. You have been sent an email with the number of your group and the room, but in case for any reason you don't have this information, my colleague Bea is over here and she can direct you to the correct room. So that's one. We meet at 3 o'clock directly at the working spaces. For that, I know that some of you are note takers and have been requesting to meet facilitators. So maybe right after this, facilitators and note takers can meet so you know who to reach out to. For example, I am a facilitator of group number 2, so the note taker for Number 2 can find me, and so on. Let me see. I will just remind you as well that there is a feedback wall on this floor, and you can participate in written discussions with each other. And last but not least, this evening will be a human rights education fair. And after the working groups, you will be given some short time to bring your materials. So have that in mind also to time your schedule. I think that is it, so enjoy your lunch and see you in a bit. Thank you.